This is a 2000 Chevy Tahoe Z71, and it was a big deal back in the day. When SUVs were all about utility and family hauling in bad weather, this thing showed up and made the SUV cool. Today, I'm going to review this old school Tahoe Z71 and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this Tahoe Z71 is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids with no reserve. The Z71 was the coolest of the original Chevy Tahoes with some nice style and off-road upgrades, and this one has been in California for almost its entire life. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Tahoe Z71, where you can bid on it and buy it with no reserve, only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the original Tahoe Z71, and I gotta tell you, I am thrilled about this vehicle. This came out when I was 12 years old, and it was the coolest thing I could imagine as a kid growing up in Colorado, seeing these cool off-roader SUVs starting to take off. I especially had a soft spot for the Z71 Tahoe. It was just so cool to 12-year-old Doug. And frankly, I thought all of these were gone, used up, driven hard, rusted away, but this one's here and the nostalgia factor is huge. So let me explain exactly what this is. Back in '92, General Motors redesigned its full-size Blazer, which at the time was a two-door SUV based on its full-size Chevy pickup truck. But the SUV was starting to grow in popularity with like suburban consumers, moms, dads taking kids to school instead of the usual mountain men going to hunt and fish and accessing their cabin, who had been the primary buyers of SUVs throughout the 70s and 80s. So for the '95 model year, Chevy created a four-door version of the full-size two-door Blazer, and they called it the Tahoe, and the world was never the same. It only took a few years before SUV popularity started growing massively. Not only was the Tahoe a huge success, but other companies started to create cool versions of SUVs that hadn't even existed only a few years earlier. The market was not only taking off for the mainstream consumer, but for the luxury buyer who wanted not only an SUV, which was this new thing, but a cool SUV. So by '98, Mercedes had come out with the ML Class, which was a huge deal, a luxury Mercedes-Benz SUV. Also in '98, Lincoln came out with the Navigator, the luxury version of the Ford Expedition, which had been released in '97 and which was also very popular. Interestingly, General Motors saw the trend, and unlike usual, when General Motors sees a trend, they actually did something about it, and they acted quickly. And so in '99 and 2000, they debuted the Cadillac Escalade, which was a massive deal and still is, the GMC Yukon Denali, which was a massive deal and still is, and they came up with cool versions of the Chevy Tahoe. There were two. This was the off-roader model, the Tahoe Z71, and there was also a street-focused, like performance Tahoe called the Tahoe Limited. The Limited was not a big success. It was two-wheel drive, lowered, meant to be for fun, but nobody really used it that way. However, an off-roady Tahoe, well, people just couldn't get enough, and this was a hit from the moment it first reached dealerships. So, what made the Z71 cooler than a regular Tahoe? Interestingly, it wasn't anything under the hood. The Tahoe Z71 used the same 5.7-liter V8 that other Tahoe models used at the time, and by 2000 it was up to 255 horsepower. Not exactly a huge number by modern standards, particularly when made into a slow 4-speed automatic transmission, but that's the way things were done back in the day. No, the Tahoe Z71 was cool because of the other stuff that Chevy did to make this stand out. The most obvious change compared to the regular Tahoe was a full one-color look on on the outside. Most other Tahoe models had chrome bumpers or black bumpers. A lot of them were two-tone, not the Z71. Everything was body color, including these cool fender flares. The whole thing just looked more high class and upscale, and that was a big coolness selling point. To complement the full single color exterior, there were other upgrades too, like these wheels, which were only offered on the Tahoe Z71, and again gave it sort of a special, distinctive, cool look compared to the standard, more utilitarian wheel design in the regular Tahoe. The Z71 also got a brush guard to emphasize its off-road capabilities. On this one, it's been removed, but you can see the posts where it would have attached. A lot of the brush guards were removed from the Z71 Tahoes, but they were there, and it also got fog lights to add to the sort of go anywhere but also be cool kind of look on the outside. Now, interestingly, it wasn't just cosmetic upgrades that made the Z71 cooler and more desirable. It actually had some real off-road hardware improvements compared to a standard Tahoe, including Bilstein suspension, Bilstein shocks, which of course made it more capable off the pavement. You also had skid plates on the Tahoe Z71, as you can see, which made it less susceptible to getting damaged when you were out on the trails. The Tahoe Z71 also had an enlarged radiator for better cooling. Obviously, if you're going slow rock crawling, the vehicle can heat up, so the radiator would help keep it cool. And most importantly, it had four-wheel drive with high and low range and a locking differential, which made it especially capable. Now, the key to all this stuff is nobody really used any of these off-road features, but this was the beginning of the era where people wanted to feel like they could go out into the world, be powerful, run over everything. And so this vehicle was a big learning experience for Chevy. Make it look cool, give it some off-road hardware, you can charge more money because then it becomes like a desirable, luxury, capable product, and you can market it that way to people who will never actually use the capability. And obviously, a lot of SUVs carry forward that trend today, including the Tahoe, which is still offered with a Z71 off-road package for people who want to feel like they're gonna go anywhere in their giant family SUV. Still available, still popular, and it started right here. But beyond the Z71 stuff, the Tahoe, the regular 95 to 01 Tahoe, was a huge success, a massively big deal on the marketplace at its time. And so let's talk through the Tahoe and the quirks and features that made it interesting and special. One of its biggest features was definitely the way it looked. Even though it was based on the Chevy pickup, which wasn't really styled to be cool, but more utilitarian, the Tahoe's boxy, basic look, I think, was always a big benefit for it. It looked capable and tough and rugged just by virtue of being boxy and not too overstyled with curvy lines. It looked like it could conquer the world. Another cool feature that this Tahoe has, not all of them did, but this one does, rear barn doors. You can see instead of a tailgate that opens upward or a split glass and lower tailgate, this has separate doors that open out on either side. And one especially cool feature about these doors is you can open them fully. All you have to do is pull on the hinge. You can see right here when the door is about halfway open, and then you release the hinge and the door opens all the way. And the benefit here was you could get large, wide items into the car easily with the doors fully open. It was a cool feature for people who wanted to carry around massive cargo in the back of their Tahoe. Now, General Motors quickly learned that that's not how most people were using these. Even though they figured they'd be popular with tradespeople who wanted to carry tools, they were really more popular with families trying to go to the grocery store or baseball practice. And so the barn doors went away for a more traditional tailgate. There were some other drawbacks here, like the line down the middle meant the rear view mirror was always a little bisected for visibility, and you couldn't easily get rear wipers into the barn doors, and so the normal tailgate prevailed. But the early Tahoe models offered this feature, and it was a hit for people who really wanted to load up the car as easily as possible. And next, we move inside the Tahoe Z71, where unquestionably the biggest quirk is the fact that this vehicle was just Deep General Motors. This was a very representative car and interior for how General Motors was at the time, which means a lot of cheap plastic all over everything, a lot of big panel gaps and curvy panels that don't line up all that well, and a lot of different colors that have aged at different rates and don't really work all that well next to each other. Now, I don't say this to be especially critical. The truth is, this was the standard at the time. Remember, this came out before the BMW X5, the Porsche Cayenne, all the other luxury SUVs that taught us what a high-end SUV should be. This was an SUV in its era, and while it's amazing to sit in here and think that this was ever the gold standard of SUVs, it really was in the late 90s. This is how it was done, and it's kind of nostalgic getting in here, looking at everything, smelling it. This is how General Motors did things back then, and at the time it was perfectly acceptable. One good example of proof that this interior really was a high-end luxury vehicle place to be was the fact that a previous owner of this car installed a car phone in it. This car was such a big deal that the people who bought it had car phones installed. They were important power players on their way to big important meetings in their Tahoe Z71. Anyway, a lot of other interesting interior quirks and features to discuss in here. Let's start with the climate vents. There are 6, including 4 for just the driver. My favorite thing is these middle vents, which are actually on the passenger side of the dashboard, they don't tilt towards the passenger. They only tilt towards the driver or straight ahead. If the passenger wants those vents, too bad you don't get them. And they're split into 2, so you can tilt one straight back and one towards the driver, but 0 towards the passenger. I also love this vent on the lower part of the dashboard directly under the steering wheel, which would like cool your crotch and your hips and your legs while you drove along. It was an interesting idea. Next up, here's another interesting idea. Cup holders were just becoming a thing, and GM thought they had to put them everywhere, and so they did. You can see 2 cup holders in the center console fixed in place. But if you pull out this little plastic panel in the dashboard, another cup holder appears. And if you pull it even further, another cup holder pops out from there. Flimsy, cheap, you wouldn't really want to put a drink in it, but it's there so they could tell you they had the most cup holders in their class. I'm sure they advertised that. Another nice feature of this interior, this slot right here is a CD player, which was a big deal on a vehicle in the late 90s and 2000s. CD players were not tremendously common in cars. They're really only in high-end luxury cars like this one, the Tahoe Z71. The Z71 also had, here's an interesting luxury car feature, a built-in clipboard in the center console. The way it worked was this panel in the middle of the center console, you would flip up and over, and then you can see the top has like a clip, and you could use it for writing notes because that's what important people did in their Chevy Tahoes. Another nice luxury touch in the Tahoe was these seats. You can see these radically overstuffed seats, but they are two-tone leather seats, plush leather with armrests. It was a nice place to spend time, even if it didn't offer the finest in lumbar support and body forming technology. It looked good and it sat good, and that's what people cared about. Now, on the subject of questionable decisions in a luxury vehicle, take a look under the passenger side of the dashboard. You can see down here, there's just mechanical components stuck there and sticking out into the passenger footwell. They've been courteous enough to cover them with plastic, but they're still there. That's something you could never get away with in 2024 in a luxury SUV. But remember, this Tahoe started life as a full-size Chevy pickup. It was a truck first. That's how they designed it. And so that's what you were stuck with until they could redesign it and come up with something a little better to meet changing consumer tastes. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the Tahoe, where once again you have these overstuffed two-tone leather seats. In the late 90s and 2000, this is what made for luxury. Just a lot of stuffing and you sink into the seat when you sit down. Now, one thing you'll notice back here is there's not an enormous amount of passenger room. There's enough. I got enough room for my knees, my head, my hips, but it's not really huge back here. And the reason is that General Motors, in creating this vehicle, prioritized cargo capacity over passenger space. They really thought that's how people would use the Tahoe. And of course, that turned out to not really be true. People used them to carry around kids and families and cared a little less about having a truck bed-sized space in back. And of course, later versions of the Tahoe would correct this problem, add more rear seat space, and even another row of seats back there. But at this time, this is what you got. Now, there were some nice convenience features in back for rear seat passengers, starting with, well, cup holders coming out of the back of the front center console. You could open this up and you had them. You also had another panel that would open up and deliver storage, a little storage compartment back there, which was nice. And if you folded down the backrest of the center seat, you had more cup holders. And this little panel in the middle was for tissues. You could, instead of having a tissue box, actually unload a tissue box into the center console, put it there, and you had a tissue dispenser in the car, which of course was theoretically a great idea for kids riding around in the back. You also had another great thing back here, which was rear climate controls. You can see the controls up on the top and then vents above next to the controls. Now, interestingly, this was only for air conditioning. You can turn it to low, medium, or high, but you can't change between heat and AC. You only had AC controls for rear seat passengers. That was it. Again, this was sort of a rudimentary beginning of the full-size family hauler SUV that has clearly been more refined over the years to add, for example, heat to the climate controls. And next we have the cargo area. Open up the barn doors and you can see the cargo area. Big, flat, wide, boxy space where you can put a lot of stuff. Except that most people really didn't use their Tahoes that way. Like I mentioned, they preferred passenger space to cargo space. And the especially interesting thing is no third row seating back here, which now would be crazy on a vehicle full-size SUV Tahoe. Of course it has a third row, but at the time, GM really didn't know how people would use these SUVs, and it wasn't a given that a Tahoe would have three-row seating. Although it was common in the Chevy Suburban, which was of course the longer version of the Tahoe, with even more cargo space and that third row more frequently in place. With that said, they were starting to think about consumer conveniences with this vehicle, and good evidence is the power lock button in the cargo area. So once you got all your stuff out, you could lock the doors and then just walk away. It was a luxury that most vehicles didn't have until this point. We take it for granted now with remote keyless entry and buttons on the side. You can just lock the car, but here you had this button in the cargo area. It was a nice, luxurious feature at the time. Also interesting in back, when you close these big barn doors, you will notice the badging. You had Chevrolet on one side and Z71 on the other. It didn't actually say Tahoe on the outside of this car, and that's because Z71 was supposed to launch as this cool off-road brand. And frankly, it kind of succeeded by making the car cool and marketing it this way as like a off-roader lifestyle vehicle. They got people to think Z71 was off-road cool. And like I mentioned, that nameplate lives on to this day, and it's still highly respected for being a cool off-roader, the Z71. And it all started right here. All right, driving the Tahoe Z71. This is such a nostalgia thing for me. This was the coolest car in the world when I was a kid. I mean, I thought the Escalade was cool and the Yukon Denali, but especially being a kid, I grew up in Denver, and you know, off-roaders were like cool. And so the Yukon and the Escalade were cool, but having this have like these, it kind of had like these wider fenders and the knobby tires and the cool wheels and the locking diff. And it was like, okay, this is the one that I would want. Plus the Chevy Tahoe was just the coolest car in the 90s. Like, it's hard to even describe to people now because the Tahoe is mostly a rental car, I think. But like back then when it was just coming out and SUVs were new, there weren't that many to choose from. And so a Chevy Tahoe, like the sound of it, it was just cool. It was just such a cool car. And honestly, it's still an excellent SUV, but people have kind of moved away from the full-size SUVs. And plus, they're not as cool as they used to be because, you know, they're known now. Like big SUVs are like well known. However, with that said, I gotta say, the driving experience certainly leaves something to be desired. Let's just put it like that mildly. And it's not because of this car. This car has 160,000 miles on it. It is the nicest 160,000 mile GM car I have ever seen in my life. No warning lights on the dash. There is seat wear on the driver's seat, but the other seats are all basically pretty nice. The exterior is amazing. It is a really nice car considering the mileage. It's got an old California plate on it. I bet it's been in California for years. So it's not rusting or rotting away like in some states, no winter. But despite the fact that it's in nice shape, these old GM trucks just don't drive great. They just didn't. They were based on full-size pickup trucks. They still are, but they've gotten the road manners heavily under control. At the time they were designing this chassis that came out in '92, they were never thinking that people would want it by the end of the decade, that people would be using it as a luxury SUV, that like celebrities would be driving around in it as a luxury vehicle. That was not even close to on the minds of the designers when they came up with this vehicle. And so the road manners are just not all that good, which means the suspension is crashy and rough. You got a lot of play in the steering. I got 6 inches here. I'm turning the steering wheel and nothing is happening to the truck. And even when it does start to turn, there is a significant amount of body roll. There is significant suspension travel. It is not kept like tidy. To put it mildly. But you do have a king of the road, sitting up high, top of the world driving position. You also do have a fairly powerful engine in this car. 255 horsepower may not seem like much, and it wasn't really, but this also wasn't a particularly heavy or even large car by full-size SUV standards today, and it was certainly enough to take it where it needed to go. The drawback, of course, being that you were going to get 12 miles per gallon as you got there. God, it's amazing just how like wallowy the driving experience is, just unsettled and wallowy. If you get past that, it's actually kind of neat. Like you do feel like you're in this old school thing, but it's not so old school that it's like rough and awful. I wouldn't describe this as either of those things. It's fairly civilized. It's just not nice by modern standards. And it's hard to believe that this was nice by the standards of its day, but you gotta understand, if you're a young person today, you gotta understand how these SUVs evolved. They really were trucks first. You know, these days when General Motors designs a Tahoe SUV, an Escalade, and the trucks at the same time, they pay a lot of attention to road manners, etc. Because now even people are using pickup trucks like family vehicles. But back then, trucks were utilitarian, basic cars, and making a luxury SUV out of it was a tall order. But they did it. They really did. I mean, it was the coolest thing on the planet, and because we didn't know any better, the only other full-size luxury SUV at the time was the Range Rover, and even that didn't have great road manners at the time. Because we didn't know better, we just accepted it for what it was, and we thought it was cool, and we did it. And over time, things have evolved in a better way. But it's amazing to get this blast from the past and get a reminder of how old school big SUVs and how like the luxury SUV kind of developed. And it is cool sitting up here. I still, 25 years later, feel cool in the Tahoe Z71. And so that's the original Chevy Tahoe Z71. I idolized this car as a kid, and with good reason. In the days before the Mercedes G-Wagon, the BMW X5, the Porsche Cayenne, this made the SUV cool. And now it's time to give the original Tahoe Z71 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 42 out of 100, which puts the Tahoe Z71 here against rivals. It beats out the more traditional Suburban and ties the Lincoln Navigator, though it can't quite beat out the real gems of its day, the more capable 80 series Toyota Land Cruiser or Hummer, or the sportier Saleen XP8. Still, the Tahoe Z71 earns high marks, especially in daily categories where it brought comfort, cargo space, and style to the suburbs, the beginning of a massive trend that continues today.